Okay, that was a very important part of the Phaedo for a lot of reasons. It's a very famous part of Plato's whole work, that particular section between approximately pages 90 and 96, because it tells us a lot about not only the particulars of the dialogue, but of Plato's whole view of philosophy and what reality is and how reality is to be explained, and the philosophical method that Plato uses. And I'm going to do a summary at the end of some of the themes of the Phaedo, in which we'll return to this. But we should remember that this is a particular dialogue, and Plato has something particular in mind, or Socrates has something in particular in mind, in engaging in this sort of philosophical memoir that Socrates does, and that is that he's setting up his final attempt to prove that the soul is immortal. And this material runs from pages 97 to approximately 103, the bottom of 103. And this is a very difficult argument, and I want to say a few things about it in the hopes of helping you understand it and read it for yourself. As always, that's the reason for these little videos. But again, we should always remind ourselves of the dramatic context and actually help us understand what the general context is and the sort of philosophical strategies that Plato is engaging in. Remind ourselves, what is the ultimate aim of this dialogue? I would have to say the ultimate aim of this dialogue, and it talks about a lot of things, obviously, but its ultimate topic and its ultimate purpose is to prove, at least to the men that are surrounding Socrates in this room, and perhaps himself, that the soul indeed is immortal. Again, you cannot forget the dramatic context that Socrates is about to die, and the time is coming actually very close at this point, as we get to the end of the dialogue, to his death. The dramatic context really is fabulous, I would say. And just to jump ahead to the end of this section, at the bottom of page 103, after Socrates has devised a pretty complex and hopefully rigorous argument, the conclusion of which is, again, that the soul cannot die any more than the number 3 can become even as opposed to odd. At the bottom of page 103, Simmias says, "But I have nothing more to say, nor do I see any room for uncertainty, except that which arises necessarily out of the greatness of the subject and the feebleness of man, and which I cannot help feeling." They're talking about the big issues, the really deep things, life, death, immortality, reality. And they're recognizing the feebleness of human reason, that is, our finitude and limitedness, and that, sure, to the best of their ability, they've examined the truth, but the ultimate truth they can never claim to have, and that, I would say, runs through so much of Plato. That sort of drama of taking your best shot at understanding things and finding the truth, but always keeping in mind that you can never really claim to have it. So what does Socrates want to convince his fellows and perhaps himself of in this section that runs from, again, page 97 down to the bottom of page 103, and is really the last argument that you'll find, as opposed to story, in this dialogue? It says at the bottom of page 97, Socrates, "I want you to agree with me in thinking not only that absolute greatness will never be great and also small, but that greatness in us, or in the concrete, will never admit the small or admit of being exceeded. Instead of this, one of two things will happen. Either the greater will fly or retire before the opposite, which is the less, or at the advance of the less will cease to exist, but will not, if allowing or admitting smallness, be changed by that, even as I, having received and admitted smallness compared with Simmias, remain just as I was, and am the same small person." Let me just check and make sure this is still on. It is. Sorry this is so long, but this is again, a very difficult part of the dialogue. So what's he trying to establish here? Really, ultimately, again, he's trying to establish that the soul is immortal, that the soul is the kind of thing that cannot die any more than the number 3 can become even. Well, he has referred to the theory of the forms. He has said that the reason that things are as they are, that is, why is one thing small? Why is another thing large? Why is something beautiful and another ugly? Why is one person just and another one unjust? He has said that these particular things, that's the concrete, a concrete particular real person, a concrete particular real painting. Why are these things why are these things what they are and as they are? Because they participate in these ideas, these forms, these essences. That is, if a painting is beautiful, you wouldn't explain that because of the brushstrokes or the composition or the colors. Socrates had said, well, my foundation here, my safety net is that I say that if that particular thing, perhaps that painting, is beautiful because it participates in absolute beauty, the form of beauty, the essence of beauty. And that this is his way of explaining the world. And really, Platonic philosophy, as it appears in the dialogues, is largely a matter of trying to get a better grasp of these forms. So, what he said there is, bottom of 97, is that these forms, these absolutes, do not admit of their opposite. That is, that the absolute beauty cannot also be ugly. Absolute greatness cannot also be less or smallness. That is, that these things do not admit their contradictions or their opposites. But how about concrete things? It's clear that, as he says, Socrates is both large and small. Simmias is both large and small. The man there, he's large compared to Socrates. He's small compared to the character Phaedo. So this would lead us to say, well, okay, let's just say that the soul is life, but then there's also something called death. Could it be that we, concrete individuals, could also contain opposites? That is, I am alive. And Socrates says that's because you participate. Your soul, you have a soul that is alive, and that soul participates in life or form of immortality or something. But it's clear that I also die, or that I will die, that we die. So we admit of the contradictory death or mortality. Well, Socrates says, well, okay, now we say that the number 3 is a concrete thing, or the number 3 is a particular thing. That is, the number 3 is not oddness itself, the form of oddness, but that the number 3 participates in oddness. It cannot become even. Well, I think that the upshot of this argument is that we should think of the soul along the same lines. That is, that the soul let's skip to the bottom of page 101. The soul is not immortality, but the soul participates in immortality, and moreover that immortality is an essential, perhaps the essential characteristic of the soul, just as the number 3 is not oddness, but oddness is the essential characteristic of being the number 3, or one of them, so that the number 3 cannot exist in any other form but being odd. He says at the bottom of page 101, he asks, tell me then, what is that inherence of which will render the body alive? The soul. And is this always the case? Yes, he said, of course. Then whatever the soul possesses, to that she comes bearing life. Yes, certainly. And is there an opposite to life? There is, he said. And what is that? Death. Then the soul, and I'm at top page 102 now, as has been acknowledged, will never receive the opposite of what she brings. And now he said, what did we call that principle which repels the even, the odd? And that principle which repels the musical or the just? The unmusical, he said, and the unjust. And what do we call the principle which does not admit of death? The immortal, he said. And does the soul admit of death? No. Then the soul is immortal, and we may say that this is proven. Well, that is, I guess the conclusion is that we, when we are alive, have a soul, the essence of which is life, the essence of which is to be immortal. It is not itself immortality, but it participates in or always brings it. So that the soul itself could not admit of